Okay, I'm back. I'm doing another series now. This series is going to be, well, it won't have as many parts. And this one has to do with capitalism as far as the system that black people need to be more concerned about, more so than systemic racism. And first thing is the systemic racism issue. I'm aware of how in this day and age, how systematic racism is being perceived. And it's different than what it was when I was growing up. Because when I was growing up, racism, if we called somebody a racist, that basically meant that was somebody who wanted to end you. It wasn't someone who wanted to give you a hard time, deny you access to some facility, or take away one of your rights as an American citizen. There wasn't anything even close to that. It was always a sign of you having to be eliminated by the racists themselves, annihilated. That was typically what it was to be called a racist when I was growing up. It meant that you basically, the person who was racist against you basically wanted you gone. And that was gone as in, off the planet, gone. That's what it meant when I was growing up to deal with the racists. It didn't mean name calling, racial slurs, racial jokes. All that kind of got, it was changed. It progressed into that over a period of time. But initially, that wasn't the way we were taught what a racist was. People who discriminated against you outright, called you the N-word, and just, blatantly was discriminated against you. We call that prejudice or bigotry. In my lifetime, I never remember anyone ever referring to anyone like that as being anything other than prejudice or bigoted in their thinking. So that's the first thing. So even the term racist, to me, is a little bit new in terms of the way it's being used. Then the other thing is when they talk about the fact that black people cannot be racist, because the fact that we don't have the ability to oppress anyone, that we don't have that power. We're not over any institutions or anything of that nature where we have the power to discriminate against other people. And so therefore, we can't be racist as black people. And the problem I have with that is not only is it a little bit too simplistic, but what it insinuates is, because I understand where it's coming from with it, they're basically saying that we can't be racist because we don't have the power to change anything in somebody's life. We can't affect other people's lives, regardless of how much we may hate them, regardless of how much we may against somebody of another color, but we don't have the power to change their lives and affect their lives in a negative way. And I get that. I totally get that, and that's true. But if we go by that as an interpretation of what a racist is, then it also eliminates most of the white people we know because they don't have the power to do that either. You know, and I understand the systemic part. I understand they're saying, well, there's racists within systems, and so therefore certain policies would favor white people over black people or would be more oppressive toward black people. Yeah, I get that. I understand that aspect of it. But again, you're talking about a select group of people who can actually do that. In other words, when you're walking down the street or your next door neighbors, if they're not a part of any of those institutions, if they're not a part of the educational institutions, the financial institutions, uh, housing, real estate, if they're not a part of that, they're not an employer where you work, they can't affect your job. They can't affect your getting a house. They can't affect your getting a loan. They can't affect any of those other things because they're not a part of it. So if the people who actually are doing it are in the system and these people are not in the system, then if that's the definition of racism, that means that they couldn't be racist either. Not just us as black people. It means white people who are not a part of the system couldn't be racist. And that couldn't be accurate. We know that that's not accurate. We know that there's white people who are not a part of any of those systems who are racist to the core. And the fact that they're not able to actually do anything to oppress us because they're not in the position to doesn't take away from the fact that if they had the opportunity, they would. And so that's the reason why I say that doesn't make a lot of sense to me because, it just by that definition, you're basically admitting that most white people cannot be racist because most of them don't work in those institutions. And even the ones that work there may not necessarily be racist or have ever participated in any form of oppression toward black people. So if it takes you to have to actually be in that position to be able to exercise your racism, and most white people aren't, that would eliminate most of the white people that we know and come in contact with on a daily basis because they're not a part of those institutions. Unless the only people that you deal with is the people on your job and they're all racist, that's usually not the case. Usually we interact with white people on a lot of different levels. Like I said, you may have people that you go to school with, uh, people socially, people that, when we all go to the malls, most black people at some point or another is going to go to a mall. So that means everybody that you pass on the mall couldn't possibly be racist because they don't work for these institutions. They don't have the power to oppress you. So that's why I don't accept that term. And that's just the beginning of what I see as the problem of the way we perceive racism in this country as black people. The other part is at some point, and I don't want anybody to ever take this the wrong way because I don't mean it in a strictly derogatory way, but at some point and on some level, black people have to decide who they want to grow up and be when they grow up. Who you want to grow up and be. And what I mean by that is we're so many different things. We're kings, we're queens, we're African American, we're black. But but at the end of the day, what are we really? And what does any of those different terminologies really mean? That's significant. And the reason why I bring that up is because how we're going to be perceived by the other races that we interact with has everything to do with how we present ourselves and how we perceive ourselves, up to and including even other black people. Because you've got black people who really think that certain black people are just automatically coons based on how they carry themselves or what they consider themselves to be. And that's just more divisions amongst us. And it really doesn't make any sense at the end of the day. And it's also something that can be exploited and has been and continues to be exploited to divide us even further. And since black people are always worried about us being unified, then that should be a major concern, because nothing hurts the unity between black people more than us not being able to decide who we really are in this country. You know, and my personal opinion, no, I'm not an African American. No, I don't go by that term. That term is meaningless to me, because the African part I don't relate to. I know Africans. I have known Africans personally. I've dated an African. And I know that black people in America have hardly anything at all in common with an African that came straight from Africa. We don't have anything in common with them. We don't dress like them. We don't think like them. We don't eat like them. You know, what we call soul food, they don't eat that crap. They don't eat that. They eat a totally different diet than we do. Not Africans from Africa. That's not the way they eat. So what we call soul food really is nothing but slave food, because that's where the food really came about, when we made the best out of the scraps that the slave masters threw the slaves. And like we always do, we take whatever we got and make the best out of it. They made the best out of it so good that white folks even wanted to eat it once they tasted it. That's soul food, but that's not African food. African food is completely different. Most Africans don't even believe in eating pork. So, you know, that'll let you know something right there. And again, they don't dress like we do. When you see them dress, they don't dress like black people in the hood. And when they come over here, they're more likely to embrace the culture, American culture, than we do. And that's every immigrant. That's not just Africans, that's every immigrant, but Africans as well. And so that's another reason why I said I can't see myself trying to call myself an African American, because where does the African part come at? You know, if you want to trace my roots back to Africa, which may or may not be true, because they could be right here in America. I know I have Indian blood, so the roots, I've never had my roots traced, but they could be right here in America, because there were black people living in America before they ever came over here, before Columbus and them ever came over here, before the slavers ever did their thing. There were black people already here. They were mixed in with the Indians. And so for that reason alone, I can't call myself just a straight up African American, because like I said, if my roots is right here in America, then I'm more American than even the Caucasian people that live here, and any other immigrant that comes here. I'm even more American. So that's one thing. And you know, as far as the king and queen thing, I don't even know where to begin on that. Kings and queens rule. Those are rulership positions. And I understand, that they don't mean when they say that you're literally a king or a queen. I understand that that's a way of trying to say, well, we call each other something positive as opposed to something negative, because we've been hit with so many negative terms, and that's the way to kind of combat that. I get that, but it sounds foolish to say king or queen when you don't rule anything. We don't even rule our own neighborhoods. Most of us don't have our own businesses. And you're a king or you're a queen. Kings and queens rule. Those are rulership titles. And I'm just against anything that that has a meaning to it, if we're supposed to be doing that to try to garner respect Yeah, I can understand how it might make you feel good when we're just around one another to use these terms, but in the real world where we have to function, those terms would be meaningless. And so I don't understand why you would use a term that would be meaningless to anyone outside of the black community. I don't get that because that's not where we live. We live in America. We don't live in a separate black America. In some ways you could argue that we do because there are things that we are separated from everybody else, but that's not something that we had a choice about. That's more about the discrimination aspect. That's not something where we actually chose to be separated. And so my point is, other immigrants come here from the other countries, and the first thing they do when they get here is they try to assimilate into American culture. They don't try to, even though they may bring their own culture with them, their own language, some of their way they dress when they were there, some of their traditional ways they may practice at home or in their own neighborhoods or whatever. But for the most part, they're trying to assimilate into white society as quickly and efficiently as they possibly can when they get here. Years ago, many years ago, probably back in the late 70s to early 80s, we had Vietnamese refugees that first came to my state, to my city. And one of the refugee centers was right around the corner from where I was working at the time. And so the retail outlet I was working with at that time, we had liquor. And so there was this old Vietnamese man. He would come in there every day. He was an alcoholic. He was just reeking with alcohol. And he would come in, and one of the local wine heads had turned him on to Richards because he didn't know. He would drink whatever. He would just come in and point. He couldn't speak any English. But they turned him on to Richards, and so he started getting pints of Richards and fifths of Richards and Little Richards. For those that don't know, Little Richards. And so anyway, the first time I messed up on change, giving him his correct change back, he he just got beside himself. I mean, he went off. And so we recounted the money, and I think it happened maybe a couple of times. And he was right. Both times he was right and I was wrong. And at that time, we didn't have the registers that told you how much change to give back. You actually had to figure it up in your head, especially if you didn't enter in the right amount. And so he would be right each time. And the first thing that occurred to me was, okay, he just, this is somebody that just got off the boat. He doesn't even know the language, but already he can count our money. Already he can count our money better than an American, which was me and some other people who he was arguing with when they didn't give him the right amount of money back. It wasn't just me. He would be right every single time. He knew our money before he even knew our language. And here we are as black people. We've lived here all our lives, and we don't even know our own monetary system. Most of us don't. And that's the reason why this session that I'm doing is going to be about capitalism, because capitalism and the monetary system, that affects black people more than racism in this country in ways that black people simply do not understand. And the reason why they don't understand it is because they don't know what capitalism is and the role that it plays in our society. So a lot of things that we see that we think is a matter of racism is actually capitalism. Because I'm going to say this, and I want you to always remember this, no matter what. Capitalism trumps racism every time. Let me say that again. Capitalism trumps racism every time. every time. And black people really don't understand that. They really don't, because they don't understand, they understand certain aspects of capitalism, but they really don't understand just how deep that runs. And so, like I said, that's the reason why I say a lot of things that we see, we call, well, systemic racism. Yeah, I'm not going to say that it doesn't exist. I'm not going to say there's not a problem, but capitalism trumps any form of racism, systemic, personal, otherwise, every single time. Here's one of the proofs that most people have witnessed themselves, and it probably went right over their head. I managed retail units for years before I retired. I wore a lot of different hats over my lifetime. I had over 20 jobs. Retail was the one that I worked the longest at, and in retail management. And it wouldn't be anything for me. And the other thing was, I worked stores that were not in the hood, because I didn't live on that end of town anymore. They would send me to stores in closer to the area that I lived in, which would be predominantly white. And so, and another thing too, I don't want to gloss over that, because I talked about that a little bit in the last segment I did about black on black crime. Let me just say this about that for a lot of black people who think that when you move out of the hood, now all of a sudden you're disconnected from the hood, or you forgot where you came from, or you don't care about the black people you left behind, et cetera, et cetera. Let me just say this about that. Martin Luther King, which a lot of black people revered, fought and arguably died for our right to not be subjected to any form of racism or discrimination. That was his fight. That we would not have to deal with that separate but equal thing that was going when he was marching and protesting and trying to get everything together. That's what that was all about. Because they had that then. We had black neighborhoods and we had white. We had segregation. And for a lot of younger black people who think that we should have never fought to end segregation because we were so much better off, you're looking at it backwards. Quite frankly, you're just looking at that situation backwards. Yes, did we have more black businesses back then? Were black people more unified? Did we have our own black communities, and did we even have black townships and everything that white people ended up burning down, and and all that? Yeah, we had all that. We sure did. All that existed before segregation. But segregation still had to end. It still had to end, because it wasn't feasible. There were, if anybody doesn't really understand segregation, just go back and look at the movie Hidden Figures, where Taraji Henderson plays the role of the woman working at NASA, where she had to run all the way down about 2 blocks or whatever it was away just to use the bathroom because she couldn't use it where she worked. That's what segregation was like. And this generation of black people who claim to be woke, you could even deal with somebody not getting being profiled at Starbucks. At Starbucks. And during segregation, the only way a black person would have been able to walk in Starbucks would have been through the door marked colored, which would have been in the back of Starbucks. You wouldn't even be able to come in the front door. So they wouldn't even had that issue, because you'd never would have been able to come in there and sit with them anyway. That's what segregation was like before they ended it. And so, yeah, you can argue, oh, well, we have our own businesses. We don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. But look how long it would take to get that up to the point to where you could actually say that. And I've told people before when they bring that up, I'm like, what about when you start traveling? That's all good as long as you're in the hood. What happens when you go outside the hood? What happens when you travel to another state? Where are you going to stay at? Where are you going to get your gas from? You got to go to the white hotels and the white gas stations. There's not that many black owned gas stations and hotels. Where are you going to sleep at? Where are you going to get your fuel from? Where are you going to get your food from when it's time to eat? There's not that many black owned grocery stores and restaurants. You're going to try to make a point of only going to the black owned ones all the way for 400 or 500 miles, really? Because that's the only way you could get around not having to deal with that situation. So yeah, segregation had to end for a bunch of different reasons. And those are just the simplest ones. But anyway, so getting back to what I was saying is that, yeah, that's one of the reasons why I live where I live at, because again, Martin Luther King and the other civil rights leaders, they literally died so that you could live where you want to live. So no one could tell you you have to live here and you can't live anywhere else. You can only live in redlined areas. You can't purchase a house anywhere else. They died for that. And now after dying for that, I'm going to reverse that and say, oh, I'm not black if I move out the hood. That doesn't make any sense. Then he died for nothing. They all died for nothing. They all fought and died for nothing. If I can just stay in the hood, because that's where they want us to be at anyway. Again, that's that crab barrel that they created. So, getting back to where I was going with this. So, when I was working in my store, there would be people who would come in the store, and one of the stores I worked at, it was in a really weird type neighborhood. I would literally have the mayor of the city. There could be a Rolls Royce in the parking lot and a homeless person sitting right outside on the curb. That's just how that neighborhood was. And so we had a lot of homeless people that would come in from time to time. If they were white and homeless, even the white managers would run them out of the store, because normally what would happen is the customers would complain because white customers didn't want to rub elbows even with white homeless people. They were offended they were around. Of course, they usually didn't smell too good. Usually they smelled like a combination of piss, alcohol, and body odor. And so they didn't want them around them. And if they bumped into them, or if they asked them for any money, anything like that, oh, that was just it. They go running straight to the manager and said, this person here is harassing me. I think they're homeless. Y'all need to do something. So the managers would put them out, because nobody's going to let no money block money, regardless of how much money it is. You're not going to let no money block money. And so at the same time this was happening, I noticed that the black people that were shopping in the store were being treated like customers. So here you have a white homeless person being escorted out and threatened. If you come back, we're calling the cops. Or if they wouldn't leave, they would actually call the cops on them. But the black people in the store were shopping and being treated like customers. What was the difference? Obviously, it wasn't the skin color, because these homeless people were white. So it couldn't be race. What was the common denominator? Money. Black people, it was green. Black people were spending green money. So capitalism trumped racism, because it's not that they liked those black people anymore. They didn't. I work with these people. I know how racist they were. I know the racist managers that I work with. I know some of the racist clerks and different people that work for me. I know. It wasn't that they liked black people. They didn't have any more use for them than any other racist minded white person does. But money made the difference, because they were spending money, which meant that's what kept the store alive. That's how we made payroll. That's how we all got paid. That's what kept the store doors open, because when you don't have any business, the doors shut very quickly. And so at the end of the day, capitalism had trumped racism. They say, yeah, we'll actually put someone who's homeless out because they don't have any money, and we're going to treat this black person that we don't even really care for real like a regular customer because they're spending money. Now, when black people ain't spending money, yeah, they get profiled, they get followed, they get treated just like we've always seen. But if they're in there spending money and they're a regular customer, and a homeless white person comes in, you can best bear believe that homeless white person is going to go, and the black person is going to be able to stay. And race has nothing to do with it. This is all straight money. Capitalism trumping racism. This is the end of part one. I'm going to try to wrap it up this time in two parts. So be sure to look for part two.